Birds Rio, the first major IP collaboration in the history of the franchise and the third overall game in the series, was released on March 21st, 2011. Done in collaboration with 20th Century Fox and Blue Sky Studios, the game is loosely based on the events of their latest theatrical release, Rio of course. While many were quick to dismiss the title as a tired movie tie-in, it turned out to be arguably the best game in the whole series. As a quick recap of events, the partnership was announced towards the end of January 2011 by Rovio CEO Mike Head and Fox's president of new media Peter Levinson, where they discussed how the partnership would introduce millions of fans of Angry Birds to the world of Rio. With that goal in mind, they made sure the launch would go swimmingly, and let me tell you, the promotion to lead up to this game was masterful. On Rovio's end, we received a fully animated trailer proudly featuring those characterful combo designs we all know and love. This served to provide the backstory of the game, where Red, Blue, and Chuck are birdnapped and taken to the scenic city of Rio. They'll make their escape and set out to free all their new friends, namely Blue and Jewel, rare blue macaws that star in the film. On Fox's end, we got this borderline surreal Nigel mashup starring the movie's main villain as well as the Angry Birds taking the place of the enslaved birds. Perhaps the pinnacle of promotion culminated on America's biggest stage, the Super Bowl, where the location of a golden egg was hidden on a crate in the background of a Rio commercial. So as for the game itself, it launched with 45 levels, though would receive regular content updates in the following years, until the game spanned over 250 levels and told a conclusive enough story. It all begins in Smuggler's Den, where rather than popping the bad piggies, you'll find yourself smashing the cages of these ever-depressed exotic birds. Things would become slightly more familiar in Jungle Escape, where the target now lied on the backs of the Marmosets, the hench monkeys of Nigel and the smugglers. They would persist through the dense forest of Jungle Escape, through the sandy umbrella-filled beaches of Beach Volley, in the dazzling and notably moving parade of Carnival Upheaval. This is until you reach Airfield Chase, where the entire flock, now at large, attempts to put the final dent in the smugglers' operation, by freeing the remaining cage birds and taking down their plane and, well, smugglers' plane. Throughout the levels, you'd enjoy the help of a few select characters from the Rio movie, including Blue and Jewel, who function as fully playable characters in a handful of levels. This would also become the first game in the series to feature actual boss levels, and not of the generic Kingpin variety. These levels were of greater scope than the conventional ones, notably featuring moving targets and Nigel, Moro the Marmoset leader, and even a motherfucking plane. But otherwise, Rio essentially functioned just like Classic and Seasons and would be an easy pick up and play for the aforementioned millions of fans, which enabled it to surpass a mind-blowing 10 million downloads in just 10 days. What a time to be alive. Although this game felt similar to the previous two entries, it did mark a minor stylistic change to the main characters, ditching these classic designs in favor of these slightly less irregular chrome designs, as we call them. This name owes its origins to the browser-based PC game that came out in May, but in reality, the designs first debuted in-game in Rio. It's more noticeable in some characters than others, but regardless, these designs would go on to define the golden era of the franchise, but are just another bit of trivia regarding this game. Now of course, no mainline Angry Birds title will be complete without its complimentary merchandise, but the dual license nature of this release made for some complications behind the scenes. Luckily, this channel's favorite toy company, Commonwealth Toy Novelty, was able to strike a licensing deal on both ends, and began developing an assortment of Rio plushies that would eventually make their way to retail in August of 2011. And they were certainly striking. This always was a curious set to me because these iterations of the Rio characters never actually appeared in the game. Sure, Blue and Jewel were playable characters and Nigel was a boss in several levels, but they were rendered closer to their theatrical appearance. These plush toys, however, were based upon merchandise-specific renderings of the characters that Rovio commissioned just for Commonwealth. This was in order to differentiate the Angry Birds Rio products from the standard Rio products, and generally I find that collectors understand this and appreciate the designs for what they are. I, for one, am of the opinion that these are much more in line with the typical ethos of the brand, and for that reason alone, I actually prefer them. Hell, for Nico and Pedro, you don't even have a choice because they never appeared in the game in the first place. Haha. So this initial wave was simply a set of 5, covering what most would consider to be the main 5 birds in the actual Rio movie. Blue, Jewel, Nico, Pedro, and Nigel. All feature detailed eye embroidery, well-shapen beaks, and perhaps most interestingly, wings that protrude out from their sides. Felt accessories can be found on both Jewel and Nico to capture their flower petal and bottle cap respectively. Each have simplistic but effective prints on them too. Those who got to experience this set in the store will recall their cyan, perhaps teal retail displays, proudly displaying the Angry Birds logo and Rio app icon on all 4 visible sides. This matched up with their side tags, which in tradition retain the general appearance of the app icon. Early in development, these elements were originally done up in green, which they thought would be the color we'd come to associate the collaboration with. They rather quickly settled on the app icon look though. No qualms about that. The sewn-in labels didn't have to face this dilemma as they're always black and white, but that doesn't mean Commonwealth kept them the same. In fact, it was mandatory that they did, as they needed to add Fox's copyright information on the backside. And while they were at it, they had the Angry Birds Rio logo printed on the front. This was a first in the history of Angry Bird touch tags. Everything appears to be business as usual, right? Set of 5 characters, often in a variety of sizes at a plethora of retailers. Well, when it comes to creating assortments that you'll actually ship to retail, certain decisions have to be made in order to meet the demands of consumers. What do I mean by this? In the case of this set, it's not difficult to come to the conclusion that Blue and Jewel would be far and away the most popular characters. And this was a reality that Commonwealth was keenly aware of. So when designating which characters were to receive alternate size variations, they did so with this in mind. With that said, this is Commonwealth we're talking about, so essentially no logic went into this. Try and follow along here. Blue and Jewel are offered in 5-inch, 8-inch, and 16-inch. They skipped the 12-inch variation for retail, and to be fair, that has historically been the least popular size variation anyways. Pedro, and only Pedro, was offered in 5-inch and 8-inch. These 3 are most commonly found with sound and in or from retail display boxes, as Toys R Us stores sold the majority of these back then. Meanwhile, Nico and Nigel were sold exclusively as 5-inch. Unless you live in Finland, because there was a non-zero chance of stumbling across a Rovio import from the very first production run of this set, that are true 8-inch, but those are essentially non-existent. They were originally planned to be part of the 8-inch with sound retail assortment, but were dropped last second for unknown reasons. Then, for specific assortments of backpack clips in 2012, Blue and Jewel would show up either on a card or with a tag. Basically, they have backpack clip variants, and they're pretty cool. Things get even more convoluted when you remember that Commonwealth designated production of the claw machine amusement variations to Good Stuff Toys. It would often make size variations that never showed up at retail. This remained true for Rio and resulted in some of the rarest, most obscure variants we've looked at on this channel. To our knowledge, Pedro, Nico, and Nigel were produced in 8-inch, 12-inch, and 16-inch as Good Stuffs, though they are exceedingly rare as you can imagine. The larger 2 are almost completely undocumented, and only show up on secondhand sites once in a blue moon. Blue and Jewel appear to be the same, and logically, why wouldn't they be? Unless I forget this oddity. It appears that many variants of Blue and Jewel are planned to be sold in this pink cage, perhaps alluding to their arc as chained together birds. Got all that down? Well, let's throw a spanner in the works, perhaps of the monkey variety, because 2012 would introduce a 6th member of the set, and a character that I'm surprised wasn't included day 1, the Marmoset. No merchandise-specific design here, this primate matches the exact render seen in the game. As such, the Marmoset is objectively the most unique in the set, and not just visually. Right in the center, you'll find a sound chip, a feature that, as I mentioned, you'll find on most retail Rio plushies. But this one, unlike the generics on the birds, was actually Marmoset specific. This was the first ever instance of this, though it was probably done out of necessity rather than anything else because they weren't gonna put a bird or a pig chip in him, right? He also sets himself apart by being offered at retail at not only 5" and 8", but 12" and 16" as well. If he had a backpack clip, he'd span the whole spectrum. How about we do some quick-hitting monkey trivia as the means to cover his admittedly weird history. So let's get into it. Here's 107 facts about the Marmoset. Wait. There's no way I can stretch the runtime of this out that far. Anyways, let's just see how many we can hit. Number 1. The location of his sound chip mysteriously moves from his chest to his ear on larger size variations. Number 2. An image of his prototype would first appear within a Toys R Us catalog in 2012, and would be accidentally used as a stock photo on various websites in the following years. Number 3. Oddly enough, the Marmoset is the only production Rio plush to be distributed exclusively at retail. Number 4. He'd most commonly be sold at retail alongside the next wave of Rio plushies, the cage birds. Ah yes, the cage birds always had a more intriguing history than the standard set, mainly because their release was even more ridiculous. Until recently, not even I had a grasp on how they were stored and distributed, but I'm here to finally set the record straight, so I'd say it's time for a brief history. Right on the heels of the standard set's launch, Commonwealth began initial sampling of the cage birds in September of 2011, with plans to bundle characters in sets of 2. 8 different cage birds were created, each representing a variant seen in the game. The pairs went as follows: green and yellow, lavender and fuchsia, red and blue, and the scarlet ibis and the blue and gold macaw. In the eyes of Rio, these were not deemed up to their standard, mainly owing to the general shaping of their bodies and extremities, so a second round of samples were created with their notes in mind. While the inaccurate colors remained, the patterns were adjusted where they now more closely resembled what we saw in-game, which must have given someone at Commonwealth a brilliant idea. Instead of these generic, uninspired 2-packs, why not sell them in cage-themed boxes? Cannot call them cage birds if they're not behind bars, right? Otherwise, they're just mildly depressed exotic birds. Rightly so, Commonwealth created these special edition boxes with plastic window inserts, a lock on the front side, and a handle up top to enable easy transport of your enslaved feathered friend. Multiple iterations of this box were created, demonstrating Commonwealth's intent to get it into production. After yet another round of samples in January 2012 that finally resulted in game-accurate colors, it seemed the cage birds were ready to hit production. But here's where things take a turn, arguably for the worse. Needless to say, the scarlet ibis and blue and gold macaw were dropped, but that happened after the first round anyways. This neat box that I just waxed poetically about? Yeah, no, we're not doing that. Instead, Commonwealth settled on releasing them in standard retail displays as if they were any other run-of-the-mill plush. Evidently, this was a cost-cutting measure, and only 6 of these prototype boxes remain in existence today. Would you risk putting these niche characters at a higher price point as a means to justify their packaging? In fact, why have 6 characters at all? Instead, we'll cut the set in half and make it an assortment of 3. As a recap, at the start, we had all 8 Rio cage birds represented with plans to release them in some sort of box set. But in the end, the final assortment consisted of just under half the original total and no special packaging whatsoever. And on top of it all, they took just about a year to actually reach the market. As in January 2013, select retailers began offering the cage bird assortment, including the fuchsia, purple, and green variants. Though I can already hear you typing away in the comments. But Maximus, Commonwealth did release the blue, red, and yellow cage birds. Some of you in fact will correctly claim that you own them. Liar! Well, you're technically not wrong. Indeed, in a crazy turn of events, the blue, red, and yellow cage birds made it into Good Stuff's production runs in early 2012, presumably before the decision was made to drop them from the retail assortments. So what we have here are 3 Claw Machine exclusive characters, which makes them the rarest in the set, and 3 other characters that were sold at retail and in Claw Machines. But that would be too cut and dry. How about we sell the blue cage bird at retail, but make it a Canadian exclusive and only sell it as an 8" variation? That makes perfect sense. Red Planet Group, Commonwealth's English and French-Canadian distribution partner, received 8" retail assortments that not only had the 3 the US got, but also had the blue cage bird. Why did this happen? Careful inspection of their production codes reveals that their production run was actually a month before the US's, and presumably were made before the blue birdie got the axe. Any way you slice it, this is an unmitigated mess. Samples with different shapes, samples with different colors, samples with different boxes, Claw Machine exclusive, delayed production exclusive. Oh boy, this is why I do this, right? Did I mention that just before production, they changed the blue cage bird's underbill? Oh, shut it already! I didn't even get to properly showcase how neat these little fellas are. So enjoy a quick montage of, well, them. Look, I even have one of those small pupilled samples. The standard Rio plushies would remain a staple in Commonwealth's lineup up until 2015, when production of the classic era plushies wink wink nudge nudge ceased. Though as we all know, the actual Rio game would continue to receive updates up through 2015, thanks to Rovio's continued partnership with 20th Century Fox in their second theatrical Rio movie. For the High Dive update in February 2014, an entire new section of the game was added solely to separate what would become a new library of Rio 2 themed episodes. To promote these new levels, as well as the film set to hit theaters in April, Commonwealth planned to add 2 additional characters to the pre-existing Rio set, one of which was a familiar face from the first game, the second a rather forgettable antagonist from the second film that never actually appears in the game. Allow me to introduce you to Raphael the Toucan and Gabby the Poison Dart Frog.
Wow!
These two have never seen the lens of a camera until now, unless you're convinced this blurry speck in the background of this WikiBear video is this very Gabby plush. These two follow the same formula as the original set, as they are based on merchandise-specific renderings of the characters, rather than anything seen in the game. Raphael only appears in a single cutscene anyways, so he basically doesn't exist in the game either. To my knowledge, these are the only surviving examples of these plushies in existence, and that assumes other copies were made. And speaking of additional characters, there is another I've neglected to mention. Based solely on his appearance in the game, he at least deserves a conversation. Luiz the Bulldog serves an important role in the events of Rio, as he's the only one who can remove the chain keeping Blue and Jewel attached at the foot. This remains the case in Angry Birds Rio, though he also stars in Beach Volley's boss level where he can assist the player by chasing after loose beach balls. In order to achieve 3 stars, the player will have to strategically knock beach balls, debris, and marmosets into position, where Luiz can make quick work of them. His brief appearance in the game was actually enough for Commonwealth to consider making a sample or 2. And so, here he is, sitting right next to that exact marmoset sample I briefly mentioned earlier. Based on the dates associated with these files, it appears as if Luiz was meant to be released alongside the marmoset, as the presumably production-ready variant with the full set of teeth was even shot in an 8-inch retail display in December of 2011. From what I've gathered, he actually has 4 different samples created between the months of May 2011 and January 2012, with varying degrees of accuracy. Though one common thread amongst them all is his tongue, emphasizing his tendency to slobber and lick anybody in his vicinity. Why he was omitted from production is anybody's guess, and I would have personally liked to have seen, or rather heard, what unique phrases his sound chip would have had. And so, there you have it, a comprehensive overview of the Angry Birds Rio set. On the surface, this was an unassuming project. I think most mistake this line for being largely uninteresting from a lore perspective, though as we demonstrated today, that couldn't be further from the case. In fact, I would argue that their history is the 3rd most convoluted, obviously behind the classic and Star Wars sets. At the end of the day, the 12 characters that made it into production in one way or another are must-haves in my book, as their aesthetic is amongst the most unique in the entire Commonwealth plush collection. And hey, they're from the original trilogy, cannot go wrong there. If you have any comments, questions, or complaints, you can let me know in the comment section below. With that, I say, peace out. Toucan Sam. He's happy. He's content. He decided to stand today. He's spinning. Look at him go. Ah! Incredible scenes. This moment in history will never be replicated. I assure you that.